Welcome to City of Keene in Focus. Thanks so much for listening. Good morning, and thanks for tuning in to our next episode of City of Keene in Focus. My name is Asa Kramer, and I am here with Elizabeth Furland, our city manager. Good morning, Elizabeth.
Good morning, Asa.
How are you doing this Friday morning?
Oh, it's Friday.
It's Friday.
So happy it's Friday.
Yeah, definitely. Today, we're going to talk about the Keene Fire Department minimum staffing and some changes there. We're going to talk about solar projects, including the one at Monadnock View Cemetery and how that relates to the community garden. And then we're also going to talk about a downtown employee parking program. So last night was City Council. Would you tell us a little bit about what happened?
Yeah, so last night was a pretty normal city council meeting. It wasn't, super long. There wasn't a ton of debate on anything, but there was a lot of conversation about the fire department. And unfortunately, I sort of made a mistake at FOP and the way that I presented the fire department issues. We had two resolutions. One, which was related to overtime that we needed for the rest of this fiscal year, and then one that is a new request that's making its way through the process to hire 4 additional firefighters. And when I explained it, I started with the wrong one first. And so last night, I had to sort of correct that and make it clear what we were asking for and where we were in the process. And so they did, in fact, approve the additional funds for the overtime for the rest of this fiscal year. So what that means is right now we've moved from a 10 minimum staffing level to a 12 minimum staffing level, and that allows us to operate our 3rd ambulance and split the calls out between, the 3 ambulances instead of 2, and be ready to respond when we have those overlapping calls that we're seeing more and more. So that was approved last night, but the important thing to remember about that's just funding it through overtime. So we're bringing in the same people that we have. And right now we have authorized 11 people per shift, and we're bringing in those same people to cover those additional spots. So 2 people are coming in on overtime every shift so that we can meet that 12 minimum standard. Because we have 11 employees right now authorized per shift, soon we won't need to bring in 2. We'll only need to bring in 1 because the 11th person on each shift has been going through an extensive training process. And soon, in the next month or 2, they should be able to count towards our minimum staffing. And so that means we'll have 11 available and just need to bring in that 1 extra for the 12th person per shift. So that was passed last night, and then I just clarified what's happening with the other request. And so we have another resolution that's making its way through the process, and last night it was referred to FOP. It is to fund 4 additional hires. So as I mentioned, instead of having 11 personnel on the shift, we would have 12. So that will bring us up to that 12 number. But again, of course, it's going to take a while, number 1, to hire if they approve this, and number 2, to train them so that they become part of the minimum staffing level. So we will still see high usage of overtime to make sure we're meeting that minimum standard of 12. But this will help bring some relief if the council does, in fact, approve this request. And the other thing that was a bit confusing is because we're closing in on the end of the fiscal year ends on June 30th. This request, this appropriation, is just for really 1 month of this fiscal year. So it's just over $70,000. It's for the wages for 4 employees and the gear and equipment needed to bring them on board. But really, it's just for the month of June because it'll take us a while to go through the process to get 4 additional people hired. And then by the time we get them hired and on board, it probably is going to be around end of May, beginning of June. So we really only need the funds for that last month of the fiscal year. So that's going to be at the next FOP meeting, and we'll be able to talk more about why we need this. The fire chief and the deputy have done a great job giving presentations to FOP about the staffing concerns. And so this is definitely not coming as a surprise. It's just the next step in the process. We had hoped that the SAFER grant, which is a federal grant, would come out and we'd be able to apply for that grant by now so that we could potentially use grant funding to bring on additional firefighters. But because it's been delayed and so much is going on at the federal level, it just doesn't make sense to wait. So we're bringing forward this request. But it's a partial request. So the SAFER grant is originally, we had asked the council to approve a SAFER grant application for 4 firefighters per shift, which is a total of 16 new employees. If the council approves this request to bring 1 per shift on now, we will reduce the SAFER grant request to 3 additional employees per shift. So we talked about that last night, and we'll talk about it again at the FOP committee meeting, and then it'll be at the following city council meeting for a final decision.
Great. And I thought your explanation at council last night was really thorough and really good. I thought there was going to be a lot of questions around that, but I think you really answered and addressed a lot of the questions that any of the councilors may have had. And I thought that was a really good clarification for the situation and moving forward and next steps.
I do think the clarification was needed because I had confused the 2 items and started with the wrong one last time at FOP. So it was important to kind of go through that before they made their decision on the overtime so that they fully understood what was coming next in terms of requests and what that meant to the budget, this year's budget and next year's budget.
Do you have any idea of timeline for the SAFER grant, or is it's all sort of confused right now?
Yeah, it's really up in the air. It should have been out by now. It's been delayed. And honestly, each day we get different messages from federal funding sources. And so it's hard to know that it in fact will come out. We think it will come out, and so we're hopeful of that. But I did also mention last night, if it doesn't come out and we're still waiting, we will need to consider again bringing on 4 more firefighters. And if you think about that, if we have 12, if the council approves this first request and we get to 12 per shift, we're still going to experience a lot of overtime because every shift will likely, most shifts, we will have someone out on a vacation leave or sick leave or something, and we'll need to cover that with overtime and bring someone in. So obviously you want to staff above your minimum, so that's not happening all the time. I mean, ideally it would be great to be a couple above your minimum level to be able to provide that buffer, and sometimes you'll have, those extra hands on the shift to be able to do more things. You'll have more people to call in if there's a fire. But because of the cost, bringing on the 4 additional firefighters is anticipated to add to the budget next year about $529,000 in wages. And that's a huge number. And so that's why we're moving through this somewhat slowly. But I did let the council know that that would increase the budget next year should they make this decision related to the 4 firefighters. And that if we don't see the SAFER grant, that we will likely be back sometime next fiscal year with another request. Last night during managers' comments, I also provided an update related to 3 different solar projects that the city is engaged in. We've been working for a while now with Revision Energy on a solar project for the airport property, one for the Monadnock View Cemetery, and one for the city's Rose Lane Cemetery. Now, the Monadnock View and the Rose Lane are smaller. Rose Lane is very small. Monadnock is a little bit bigger, but the one at the airport is significantly larger. So I did provide last night to City Council a draft layout for the one at the airport and talked a little bit about the one at the Monadnock View Cemetery. The Monadnock View Cemetery, originally it was thought that we would be leasing property at the cemetery for this solar project, and then there would be an off-taker that would be buying the energy through what's called a power purchase agreement. And the off-taker is Cedar Crest, which they have property that abuts the cemetery. And so we were going through the process with that understanding. And then as we got closer, it became clear that actually purchasing the property that was needed for the solar project made more sense. The lease revenue was going to be very small. I think it was about $1,000 a year. And it was going to encumber the property for 20, 25 years with some additional opportunities for extensions. And so selling the property to Cedar Crest and allowing them to negotiate directly with Revision is the direction that we ultimately went. And so that did change the layout of the solar project. And then what happened, because we changed the layout of the solar project, it impacted our community gardens. And so we have a community garden program at Monadnock View Cemetery. And we've had a community garden there for, I don't know exactly how many years, but for a really long time. And we've been involved with Antioch and initially setting up this garden. And we have at least 17 gardeners that are active there. When Revision was going through the process to get the permits that they needed to construct the solar project, the gardeners became really concerned about what would happen to the gardens and what would happen to them for this growing season, because even though our Parks and Rec director, Carafis Hennessy, has done a fabulous job creating a plan for community gardens with expanded space, we were planning on building that expanded space in those community gardens next year, so not this year. And for a few reasons. One, we need to allocate resources, staffing to do that. And then also, secondly, there's going to be construction out there related to the building of the solar project, and we thought that might conflict. And so during this process, the community gardeners were very concerned. They really wanted to find a solution for this growing season. And, I thought a lot about this. We have 15 city councilors that represent many different groups. And one of the great things about having such a large council is they all are active and involved with different groups, different neighborhoods, and so they're representing their constituents. And so one of our city councilors came forward, was concerned about the gardeners and coming up with a solution. And so that's what we did. I was really excited to share with the council this week. Kara and her team and Public Works all came together and came up with a proposal. They met with the community gardeners to talk about building one section of the community garden and getting some plants in the ground.
That's amazing.
I know. So that was really cool. It really was one of those things where we thought we were doing a great thing by creating expanded space and a better community garden, and really hadn't thought fully of the impact for this growing season. And then when we started going through this process, it became evident that people were dependent upon this growing season for a number of reasons. And so it was important for us to find a solution. And so that's what Kara and Public Works and her team did. They worked with the community gardeners, and now we're going to build a small section of the community garden for this season, and we'll get some plants in the ground.
That is super cool.
Yeah, it's great that we had, the involvement of lots of people to help us solve this, and also just the input from the gardeners about what exactly do they need, how much space, what do we need to do to make this happen. And so it turned out to be a great solution with a lot of people involved in coming up with, ideas of how to make it happen. So I was really happy with that. So the other two projects are moving their way through the process. The one at the airport, we needed to update the site layout. We needed to make some adjustments due to the increased runway protection zone requirements. Every time we do anything up at the airport, we need to go through the FAA, and so we needed to make some adjustments there. And then also we needed to go through permitting, and there's a grasshopper sparrow habitat at the airport. There's a lot of birds at the airport. It's actually a really great place if you're interested in just watching birds, taking pictures of birds.
I had no idea.
That's super cool. and we do have a lot of people that go up there to do that. And so through this process, we learned of this habitat, and we needed to protect that. And so we've made adjustments to the location to do that. But this did mean we needed to downgrade the size of the solar project a little bit, but it's still a huge project. we're at 5.5 megawatts DC power with an estimated annual production of 6.49 million kilowatt hours. It's
Holy
huge.
moly.
Yeah,
That's
it's huge.
awesome.
That's not something we'll see this year in terms of construction. We'll still go through the process. We hopefully will be ready for next year to get to construction. So the only one that will be moving to construction this year is the Monadnock View Cemetery project. The other thing I updated the council on during manager's comments is related to follow up on a conversation that we had at FOP. We had a request come in from some downtown business owners and downtown employees to look at our parking program and look for ways to accommodate the employees in the downtown and really looking at different hours for parking. And so one of the concerns we heard at FOP was that, especially for restaurant owners or operators, they were coming in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon while we were still enforcing parking in the downtown. But then their shift would go, until whatever time when the restaurant closed. Maybe it was 9 o'clock, maybe it was later. And so in order for them to park, they would either have to park further away and then walk there at night, and some of them would walk home with their tips, and they were concerned about that. Or if they were going to park closer, we didn't have an option for them that was closer that they could park at starting at 3. So because our parking enforcement goes till 5 right now. So one of the things we did was take a look at the Wells Street Garage, and we have a program at the Wells Street Garage which has some permits, some 24/7 permits, as well as some public parking on the upper level. And I was really excited to see the proposal come in from Chelsea North, our parking manager, and Rebecca Landry, deputy city manager, for a pilot program for downtown parking that would accommodate these employee requests and utilizing the Wells Street Garage. And basically what it does is it creates, we're calling it a pilot because we have to make sure that we get it right before we actually make it a full-blown program. And there's a little bit of experimenting that will go along with this because we are renting spaces. But if you go by the Wells Street Garage, you'll see there's often a lot of empty spaces, even though it might be fully rented. And that's just because of time of day and how people are utilizing the spaces. And so what this pilot program would do is in the evening, we could have an employee permit program for 25 reserved spaces on the lower level of the garage starting at 3 p.m. because that was the time that we heard, and it would go till 1 a.m. And we are proposing $30 a month for that. And then in overnight residential permits, we believe we could do 10 more spaces available on the lower level starting at 5 p.m. and then extending free parking. So expanding the public parking on the upper level by an hour. So instead of starting at 5 o'clock, moving it to 4, we wanted to move that to 3, but we were concerned it might overlap too much with the daytime uses. And so we're experimenting with 4. But what we'll do is we'll see if this works, see if people like it, get some feedback, see if we are creating any conflicts with other users or if we have more opportunities to make some adjustments.
That's awesome. I think this is such a good idea. So if someone who is an employee of a downtown business wants to sign up for this, should they go to Parking Services?
They should go to Parking Services, yes. And I do think that parking will also do some outreach as well. We do know there are at least the people who came to the meeting that were interested in another solution, so we'll reach back out to them to see if this is something they might be interested in.
That's great. I'm stoked about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think parking is just one of those things we are always going to need to continue to evaluate what's happening, uses, what type of uses are needed, because as our businesses change, as the demand changes, we need to also change. And so I think this is a great plan, and I'm hoping that it will be a successful pilot. The other thing that we talked about, and I'm not going to go through it because legislation, we could just talk on this podcast about legislative happenings in Concord.
We could probably make a whole podcast about that.
I think we could, and I don't want to.
Yeah, right.
But it's a big topic, and so during this season, all the departments follow legislation that would impact the city, either negatively or positively, and we weigh in on the ones that are most important. And sometimes we bring those to the council so that we can weigh in on behalf of the city council. We did that last night and at FOP last week, and they approved our recommendations, but honestly, things change so fast. Next week, some of these things could already be decided. And so we will weigh in and follow the ones that we mentioned last evening. But also we have a legislative delegation meeting coming up where we bring together Keene's delegation every year, once a year, and we invite the New Hampshire Municipal Association to talk about what bills are making the crossover. So whether they're crossing over from the House to the Senate or the Senate to the House, and which things we should be concerned about. And so the ones we talked about last night will be added to the list, and then there will be others.
Great. Is there anything else that you want to talk about today?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Well, super. As always, I'm going to mention that we are hiring for some great jobs. Go to keenenh.gov/jobs. Parks and Rec has announced their summer programs. Go to keeneparks.com to check those out. There's a lot of really awesome offerings. I know they're doing some egg hunts for Easter for the kiddos. I think there's an adult egg hunt as well, which got really, really positive feedback last year. Go check out the info for that at keeneparks.com. Is there anything else that we should mention before we wrap up?
I think that's good. I think
All
that's
right.
enough for today.
Well, super. As always, thanks so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Thanks for listening to City of Keene in Focus. We'll see you next time.